Before we worked with Dave Fridmann, we would always try to work in the confines of what we thought normal record making was, but we always hated it.
He always puts what the band's vision is ahead of any sort of egotism or like his idea about how something should sound.
We kind of want to put, one guitar amp in the bathroom, and then we want to put another one down the hall 30 feet away, facing the wall. He'd be like, great, let's see what it sounds like. So it came time to fight. He never demanded anything. He just, if that's the way you want to do it, let's go do it.
If people have some sort of musical or sonic problem, chances are I can help them achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. And that is extremely gratifying.
Hearing from producers that they had once been not-so-successful musos is common, but Dave Fridmann came to it from a different perspective. As the bass player in Mercury Rev, he found being in a band was creatively prohibitive in comparison, especially after work began with the Flaming Lips, the band that would go on to define his career.
I had already been working on the first Mercury Rev record for a couple of years, and John Donahue from Mercury Rev was actually their tour manager and live sound man. And so when they could afford a live sound man at some point, John called me. So I went out on the road, met them out on the road, doing live sound for them. And at the end of the first couple of months of touring, I knew that there had been discussions, we're going to go make another record and see what happens next. And I, one night after a show, got up enough courage to finally sort of sheepishly ask them, well, maybe I could record your next record.
But Dave need not have been shy. From the very first time that Wayne Coyne, frontman for the Flaming Lips, met Dave, he knew he'd met a creative equal.
We were playing what we thought at the time was a very prestigious show opening up for Jane's Addiction in Los Angeles. They were playing a series of 10 shows, and we were one of the lucky groups to be chosen to open up for them. So we thought we should get a real sound engineer for this thing. And he flew out, and we told him we didn't want it just to be a standard, just turn the faders up. We wanted him turning up guitars and effects, and we wanted it to be a really sort of visceral, dynamic show. Not just what we're playing, but what he could do to enhance it out there at the board. And I think all this utterly appealed to him. It's like, oh, great, I'm not just setting the controls and having, dinner or something. He told us he wanted to wear, it's like a hospital smock with nothing else on. So he's out there mixing sound. He had his hair in some giant ponytail on top of his head, wearing just this hospital smock with no underwear or anything on underneath. And I think half the audience was simply watching him. So after the first show, we thought, this is our guy.
Triple J, the Producers Series, Dave Fridmann.
As the Flaming Lips, we had already made, 3 or 4, 5 records, something like that. We had done stuff as we were the producers, but basically we'd say we're the producers and you're the helper, And I think when we went into this thing with Dave, he sort of was like, yeah, well, you guys are the producers and I'm going to help you find these sounds. But we don't know anything in a technical sense. I would never say, oh, we're going to use this microphone, it's going to run through this compressor, any of that sort of technical stuff. I would simply use other records as references. I'd say, the way that this drum sound is on this Nirvana record or Led Zeppelin or whatever, I'd say, we kind of want to do that sort of thing here, and I'd grab a bass sound from a Jimi Hendrix record or something.
They'd just be like, I don't know, more Jesus and Mary Chain. And I'm like, well, does that mean more reverb, more feedback? Does that mean more just, I don't know what you're talking about, more Led Zeppelin, more, that's about the only way we could talk was just like playing tapes for each other.
But inevitably, we were never that satisfied with what we perceived we were doing. And if we were lucky, we'd stumble upon some dumb way right there when we were doing it. And almost every time he would sort of roll his eyes and be like, I know why you like it, because I ran it through this gizmo, ran it through there, and out of desperation ran it back there, and it comes out the speakers, and it sounds bright and shiny and distorted and freaky. Almost every time he thought, I bet they're really going to like this, even though it's technically a disaster.
It was so crazy because this is before Steven was in the group as well. So I'm trying to explain the circle of fifths and some really basic musical things to him, because they would just be, they'd go to do a harmony and I'd say, well, that's not really the right note. They'd be like, why?
Triple J, the Producers Series, Dave Fridmann.
After completion of the Flaming Lips album In a Priest-Driven Ambulance, Dave went to work on finally completing the first Mercury Rev album, Yerself is Steam, soon followed by the loudly experimental album Boces. During the recording of this second album, Dave learnt a lot about how not to behave behind the desk.
Recording Boces was a nightmare. A lot of personal stuff was going on, which I don't really know how much is out there, but It was very crazy, interpersonal relationships inside the band. By the time we finished Boces and we're actually out touring with it, I know I personally had made up my mind to dedicate X amount of time to making my own record, and everybody was just like, I don't ever want to work with these people ever again for the rest of my life. Literally, we'd be mixing, and so we had people, all 6 of us at the board, basically just like turning up our favorite parts as they went by. And, trying to still have it sound like a song by the time we were done with the whole thing. Punching each other and it was total chaos. I totally blame myself with how all that stuff went down. I was a complete tyrant in the studio. It was my worst performance behind the desk ever. Hopefully never to be paralleled again. As a member of the band and recording the band, I put it upon myself to be like, well, I'm in charge, and if I don't like the part, we're not recording it. And it was absolutely asinine on my part.
Dave would continue to work simultaneously with Mercury Rev and the Flaming Lips, producing both See You on the Other Side and Clouds Taste Metallic in 1995. In 1996, he headed off to LA to work on Pinkerton, the second album from Weezer.
I got to be good friends with the engineer and who had been working with them before me, Joe Barisi, and he said that they kept coming in and putting down this Flaming Lips record and saying, make it sound like that, make it sound like that. And finally he just said, why don't you call that guy and get off my back? I had certainly never worked with anybody so successful. Wait, who was working on the last one? Rick Ocasek? Right, okay. I mean, I knew I wasn't producing, but still, it was big shoes to fill, and I was definitely very nervous about the whole thing. They were very early adopters of technology, which was interesting to me, and they had a strange marriage of old and new school. So I'd never worked with anybody that could even afford to consider this possibility. I think we went through like 30 reels of tape in the 2 weeks I was there, and that represented, 4 record budgets for me. They'd record a song 9 times, and it would be completely different each time. And then they'd have me edit them together. They'd sit down with a list and show me all these edit points they wanted to make, and I would edit the tape together into one complete take, and then they'd decide whether they liked that or not. And if not, then they'd do 9 more takes and keep going like this until they were done.
The producer series on Triple J, Dave Fridmann working with Weezer.
The only one I can tell you for sure that I did was a Butterfly, which was very strange. Rivers, he kept telling me the whole time we were recording, I got this other song, but we're just going to wait till the time is right. And apparently the right time was 4 a.m. on the last night. He finished the first take, and that was the first I heard it, and I just got on the talkback and said, are you sure you want to say that to people? And he was like, yeah, I'm sure. I'm like, okay, good. But because I was like, that's amazing, but I can't believe you're being this honest and open and unguarded in life, let alone on a record that's about to go out.
In 1996, thanks to the making of a 4-part experimental album by the Flaming Lips called Zyreka, work began on Tarbox Road Studios, after Dave determined it would be cheaper to build a brand new studio to make such an album in than it would be to hire the studio and all the gear somewhere else.
We finally had these really great tools at our disposal. We definitely spent a long time in the 90s saying, well, if we have to choose between gear and time, we'll take the time. But as it turns out, the gear actually matters. When the Flaming Lips drum sound, we had an idea of like this sort of Zeppelin-y, crazy, roomy kind of drum sound that we always liked. But it took us sometimes a week to get the drum sounds right for a single track. But there was a time when I had just gotten in a new microphone, this new very expensive U47, and we're like, all right, well, we'll do some drum recording here. So Wayne goes out to the kitchen, makes himself some coffee. At the time, he still smoked. He got the ashtray. Come into the control room, sit down. We're going to be a couple hours before we even figure out the kick drum sound here. We open the mic for the first time on the drum kit, and Steven's out there playing, and just go, okay, well, the drums are done. Now what are we going to do? And we like, oh, okay, well, having that, $8,000 microphone, it does make a difference.
Triple J, the producer series.
Dave, now in his new fancy digs with his new fancy gear, was really able to turn things up. In 1997, he began work on what would become the first commercially successful records for both the Flaming Lips with the Soft Bulletin and for Mercury Rev with their brilliant album Deserters Songs.
I think it could be argued that Mercury was trying to do stuff like that from the beginning, just hopelessly, and myself amongst them, hopelessly unprepared or incapable of actually making a record like Deserter Songs before we actually made it. Still was not a great time for the band. They were still having a lot of personal drama. And I think you can hear a lot of the desolation, a lot of the longing for a simpler time, a lot of the need for companionship and hope that somehow the future can be better. I think you can hear that in the song. But yeah, we've got the clarinets, and we've got all those weird background vocals, me and John and Sean, and hard to say anymore. A lot of weird, strange samples that Jonathan and Sean had created. All these weird, like, sparkly noises and stuff that would just sort of come and go and accent certain parts, which those guys are genius at. There are some real strings in there, but I know at some point we had with the gear we had and the samplers we had at that point that we got into being able to do good fake strings, or at least what we thought was good fake strings. That song was really worked on a ton by Jimmy Chambers, the drummer. If you hear some of his solo project, you'll hear Bottleneck Stomp immediately. He had conceived and recorded quite a bit of it, really without some of the other guys. And at some point, he brought it forward, and he had recorded it all at an ADAT studio in Buffalo. And Jonathan came forward and sorted out lyrics for him and figured out some melodies. And then once it became like a Rev song, then background singers get involved and more symphonic instruments get involved and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it actually came from Jimmy right from the get-go. That was a song with way too many tracks and way too many parts. That was, we started out on ADAT, but by the time we were done, it was 48 tracks and most tracks had more than one thing on them. And it was, still mixing all in analog, so having to switch channels and change EQs in the middle of songs and just, and of course the full version is how long? I don't know, 7-8 minutes or something. It's a big song, so you've got all these different sections. That was really just an issue of like just trying to keep everything, keep it all in track and still have it sound like a song by the time you were done.
Triple J, the producer series, Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips on Dave Fridmann.
There's a term, we call it code blue, where we knew this thing that we were going to do was going to be great. And everything that we've done has made it boring and normal. And no one in the room is excited about it.
There's been many occasions where we've all just stood up and left the room at the same time, like, whatever we're hearing right now, we don't want to hear that anymore. We're leaving. You'll find yourself following yourself down. Oh, that's pretty. That's pretty. That's pretty too. Let's keep putting it. Oh my God, it's a John Tesh song.
But sometimes through just sheer force of personality, I say, I don't care. I like it, and I'm going to do it this way. And Dave is very intense, which is why I think we like working with each other, because he won't budge. He's stubborn, and he believes in what he believes he can make this thing work. And I believe it as well. And sometimes what we believe isn't the same thing. He will say, if you believe in your idea, you'll fight for it. And if you believe it enough, you'll keep fighting. And if you don't believe in it enough, it doesn't deserve to win.
For whatever reason, a lot of bands, when they come to work with me, it's like at the time in their career when they're saying, we want to destroy all preconceived notions of what it is that we do, and we want your help doing it. I think a lot of their fans end up hating me as a result, but that's the kind of, to me, that's fun.
By 2004, Dave had already produced 6 Flaming Lips records, firmly cementing his belief of rushing into the unknown. It was a philosophy that he boldly brandished when the ladies of Sleater-Kinney contacted him about producing their final album, The Woods.
Well, I actually talked to them on the phone a bunch before I met them. They were difficult conversations where I was like, I don't really like your other records, and I did tell them why. And like, if you guys are interested in doing something different, then I'm totally on board. And if you're interested in doing what you did before, I'm totally not interested. I had never been so direct ever before with any band. I've said that many times since then, but that was really the first time where I felt like I had put myself out there that much. They specifically told me, we want you to cut our audience in half. Half the people, people that only like what we've done in the past, hopefully won't even like what we're doing now. We want to do something completely and utterly different. And that, of course, is completely appealing to me. What happened is they came out and we did a couple of days of pre-production and where we just stood in the room and they played. And I was like, I got to tell you, this already doesn't sound like any of your other records. Not like, this is totally intense and amazing. And the core of it, the root of it, the thing that's so mind-bogglingly fantastic about it is them just playing. I was just sitting in there with them in the room with the amplifiers blaring and everything, and it was just like, this fucking rules.
Triple J, the producer series. Dave Fridmann.
We didn't even really want a producer at the time, and I think we started to realize that, for a band like us that was completely unknown, to sign to a major label and not really have a name to back it up, we were kind of throwing ourselves out to the wolves.
When I worked with them, it was really just the two of them, and it's just crazy because they're both such great musicians. They can both sing any part and both play any part on any instrument. They'd just be like, well, what if the keyboard solo went like this, and just play some crazy-ass thing like, you'd be totally impressed if a classical pianist was playing it, and then the other guy steps up and says, well, what about like this, and then does the same thing, only different. It's just like, holy crap, you guys can really fucking play.
In 2006, work began at Tarbox Road Studios on what was to become one of the biggest albums of 2008. At the time, MGMT were virtually unknown, and it was their first big studio experience.
We were just really nervous and kind of felt really vulnerable at the time. We didn't have a manager, and we were on this huge label, and we didn't really know what we were doing. He was good at kind of acting as a middleman with the label and telling us advice about how to deal with major labels because he had a lot of experience with that. He was just very relaxed.
They grew up a lot in the making of the record. They, having to deal with the realities of like, oh, we're on a major label, and I had to definitely talk to them on many occasions like, guys, you didn't really think they were just going to give you the money and not ask anything in return, did you? Not that we had to compromise necessarily in the recording, but in terms of what, how the people wanted to market things and blah blah blah. You have to work with them. They did a bunch of demos and stuff, and obviously they had already made the EP. Even though we didn't really use those tracks, they knew other songs and did a bunch of new programming for it. But we did the whole record, I think, in less than 3 weeks. You just wake up one day, get in there, by the time you're ready to go to eat, you've already done 6 different bass tracks, 4 different guitar tracks on 3 different songs, and you can't remember at all what happened by the next day.
Pieces of What was a song that we wrote pretty much in the studio. Like we had a basic idea, but it really was written in like a couple of days in the studio, and we didn't have any idea what we were going to do with the production. And we had brought, just for fun, this like reel-to-reel tape machine that had a tape on it that was broken. And Dave's technician fixed it, and it had like a high school band playing like popular orchestra pieces. And so we spent like an afternoon in the studio just recording like this thing going like backwards or like played at different speeds or like all this weird stuff, and just like laid it under the whole song. It was one of those things where it wasn't like a specific sound you could have in mind before you did it, but just like it was a fun experience doing it, and then the end result sounded really cool.
Triple J, the producer series. Dave Fridmann.
Yeah, that was something I remember too, that he said early on, that he cared so much less about what a band sounded like than how they were as people.
This is the bottom line when I'm going to work with anybody. It's, truthfully, even if I hated the music, I would work on it and work my ass off on it as long as we can work together.
As a human, he's really one of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. Even if he made horrible records, I would still hold him in very high esteem just because he's such a great person. And so in the end, all that skill and all that fighting and all that determination, that gets us to the sound. But the reason I want to be with him and be around him is really he's just a cool human.
And his whole family is kind of like that. Like they kind of judge the bands that he works with. And it doesn't have to do with their music or whether they're cool, like whether they have like cool style or something. It's just like if they can hang out with them, then that matters more.